We had a jumbo 50 basis point rate cut from the Bank of Canada last week. What does that mean for the housing market? And of course, the Liberal government came out with a big announcement saying that they're actually going to be cutting Canada's immigration targets from just under 500,000 people per year to under 400,000 people per year, roughly 100,000 cut for 2025. How is that going to impact housing? So what I'm going to be chatting about today. My name is John Pasalis. My team and I help buyers and sellers throughout the Toronto area make smarter real estate decisions. If you'd like to meet with me and my team, just click the link in the show notes below or send me an email at askjohn@movesmartly.com. So we're going to kick things off by chatting a little bit about the Bank of Canada's big rate cut, 50 basis points. Of course, the fourth cut, their first 50 basis point cut, moving us to 3.75%. And a lot of indications we might even get another 50 basis point cut in December. So how is this playing out on the market? So about a week or two ago, I kind of posted this chart in a tweet showing that what we've been seeing in the market is actually sales slightly picking up and listings kind of cooling down a little bit. And what is happening, I mean, at least again, my interpretation, what I'm seeing on the ground, is that I think a lot of people are anticipating the market's going to be busier in the spring. So you have some buyers jumping in saying, you know what, the market's slow now, let's take advantage. I don't want to be competing with 20 or 5 offers or 10 offers in the future. I like the fact that the market is calm. Let's buy a home today to kind of get ahead of what might be a busier spring market. On the flip side, you have some sellers saying, you know what, the market's dead right now. There's no point in listing. Why don't we just wait till the new year? Things will be busier. So what has that happened is created, basically, it's causing the months of inventory to dip a little bit over the past 4 weeks. So the months of inventory is effectively the number of homes available for sale divided by the number of sales, and it measures sort of the relationship between supply and demand. And when the months of inventory is increasing, it means the volume of new listings coming on the market is growing faster than the demand in terms of sales. So inventory is actually piling up. When months of inventory decreases, it means sales are outpacing listings, and it is a sign that the market is gradually heating up. Doesn't mean it's frenzied or busy, but it is kind of going in the opposite direction. Rather than cooling, it is kind of heating. And that is what's happening right now. If you look at this chart, it shows months of inventory 4 or 5 weeks in a row trending down. Last week, it kind of flatlined because we lost 1 day due to Thanksgiving. But aside from that, when I look at the latest data, it looks like we're going to probably be inching down slowly. Now, this does not mean, I think a lot of sellers or some people are looking at this thing, oh my God, 50 basis points, the market's going to be crazy tomorrow. I'm going to get an extra 50,000, 100,000 for my home. It's not happening. The only thing that's happening is just homes that have been sitting on the market a little bit longer are now selling. And again, so that's the difference. It's not like we're seeing tons of bidding wars. We're just seeing, you know, a little bit more activity on the ground right now. And I think, again, a lot of this is people anticipating what might be a busier spring market. Now, even when we think about what might happen in the spring market, as I've said repeatedly on this show, I mean, I do think the market is more likely going to be busy. I don't necessarily think it is going to be an insanely competitive market. At the end of the day, the key thing to think about is that even with a Bank of Canada's cuts, the fact is most Canadians lean on fixed mortgages, and those are not going down too much. I mean, they're going to be down a little bit between now and the new year, but we're still probably going to have mortgages in the 4% range. And that is still relatively high compared to what we've had in the past. And I don't know if that is low enough to create a crazy market. But of course, I think it's going to be busier because the past little while we've been pretty much at 20-year low in sales volume. So, I mean, it's hard to imagine things getting worse from here. We'll likely get a little bit busier. The question will be what will happen with new listings, of course. Are we going to see a surge in new listings in the new year? Very possible, very likely. But again, the balance is going to be just determined largely if demand outpaces listings or if listings outpaces demand, which is impossible to predict. But we should see certainly more buyer activity in the new year. So again, this is how the market's responding to rates right now. And again, everyone's doing something different. There are, of course, a lot of buyers who are just saying, I don't want to buy now. I don't care about getting ahead of the market. I just want to wait till the new year. Rates will be lower. They think they'll be able to afford more, but like I said, the difference in what they could borrow based on the change in fixed rates is going to be pretty nominal. But of course, there's going to be the federal government's mortgage rule changes on insured mortgages. So anyone that has less than a 20% down and wants to and can afford just over $1 million, they will of course be impacted by those policy changes. So again, everyone's doing slightly something different. Some sellers are still, obviously a lot of sellers are still listing. They're not waiting till the new year. But again, we're seeing these slight changes, and it's kind of causing months of inventory to trend down slightly in the GTA. And that'll probably continue. Again, we'll see, but over the next month or so, we'll see how that plays out. So that's a little bit about how the market's responding to lower rates and the anticipation of lower rates. I want to chat briefly about the federal government shift on immigration policy. This, of course, is a massive change. For years, Canada has been supercharging the demand for housing, both by ramping up Canada's immigration numbers. So those are permanent residents, almost doubling them. I think we used to be kind of close to 250 or 300,000 new permanent residents per year. They ramped that up to 500,000. But of course, the other big number was non-permanent residents, which is sort of the bigger factor in sort of Canada's population growth. I think that hit close to 800,000 people per year. So we went from a period where Canada's population was growing by 3 to 350,000 people per year, peaking effectively at 1.3 million people per year. So, I mean, you don't need a PhD to figure out what that does to housing. Obviously, it supercharges the demand for housing, has a very big impact on prices and rents. So going back to, before we talk about how sort of Canada's change in immigration policy is going to impact housing, we need to rewind the clock and remember that the federal government talked about that they will be cutting the number of non-permanent residents in Canada. This was announced by Mark Miller earlier this year. We've been seeing signs of that. They've kind of cut the number of international students moving to Canada. We've seen even Mark Miller announce that this is impacting rents. Rents are cooling because of his policies. I mean, they're acknowledging that, I suppose, that their previous policies fueled rents, and now their shift in policy is driving down rents. But effectively, we need to understand what that means and how their policy shift is going to impact sort of the demand for housing in Canada. So their goal, of course, is to, they announced earlier this year, to cut the share of non-permanent residents that make up Canada's total population to, I believe it was 5%. And what that means is the number of non-permanent residents in Canada will actually be declining each year, right? So even though our population's growing from permanent residents, if the number of non-permanent residents every year is falling, of course, that is putting, again, downward pressure on Canada's population growth. So the Bank of Canada published this chart. This was, I believe, from their April monetary policy report that kind of modeled out what Canada's population growth would look like under these new changes from the federal government. And this was only talking about the change in non-permanent residents. This does not account for this recent change in immigration. And we can see here what this chart is showing is the growth in the non-permanent residents per year in red, permanent residents in blue, and we can see it peaks at around 1.3 million. And in the years that follow, it's showing, of course, blue is still positive. That's the permanent residents, but the non-permanent residents are negative, right? So we are actually, our population is actually declining each year in the context of the number of non-permanent residents per year. So the total population growth is the growth from permanent residents, which is roughly 500,000, subtract the decline in non-permanent residents. So we'd be growing by around 300,000 people per year. And of course, that is a massive change from the 1.3 million people per year. Now, layer on top of this now that they're going to be cutting the number of permanent residents, I mean, the total population growth could go from, I mean, I don't know what the numbers will end up being, but obviously likely less than the 300,000 that the Bank of Canada had anticipated, because those numbers were based on an assumption that we're still growing by around 500,000 people per year. So why does all of this matter? I mean, it matters because it makes a huge difference. I mean, if our population is growing by 1.3 million people per year, or even like 600,000, which is what we were growing by in 2017 and 2018 when we had this surge in prices, it is a very big difference than if we're going by 200,000 people per year, right? And I think, again, we need to step back and understand how this impacts housing. We keep hearing about a supply shortage, and 100% Canada has a shortage of housing. This is largely why when you grow our population by 1.3 million people per year and you only build 200,000 homes, you're not going to have enough homes for everybody. And that obviously pushes home prices and rents higher. But the important thing to keep in mind is that today's prices and today's rents reflect the supply shortage today, right? What matters going forward in terms of home price appreciation and rent appreciation is the relationship between population growth and housing completions and all of that going forward, and interest rates, right? So, of course, if next year our population grew by another 1.3 million people per year and we only built 200,000 homes, we'd have a lot of pressure on rents and home prices. But if we fast forward a year and our population's only growing by 200,000 people and we're completing 200,000 homes, it actually means that housing completions, the amount of homes we need in that given year are actually higher than the need from the population growth, right? So that is taking pressure off of the market and may actually lead to a dip in rents. It may lead to slight cooling in prices. Again, this isn't a prediction. I mean, this is just in theory. If your population isn't growing rapidly and it is growing at a more sustainable level, the pressure on rents and prices goes away. And again, I think it's important to remember because, I think when we think about, and I get a lot of questions from people who want to be real estate investors. I think what a lot of people miss is that it was easy to be an investor over the past 10 years under this government because the investing in real estate game was kind of rigged in your favor. When you have governments supercharging the demand for housing, it's like going to a casino where the game is rigged in your favor, right? And that's what it was. And everyone thought that, they were making money off real estate from their shrewd investment decisions, when it was really government policy largely that was stimulating and driving up home prices and rents for investors. So going forward, this assumption that home prices will just keep going up 10% per year and it's a lottery ticket and it's the fastest way to get rich, may not be there if population growth dips and it goes to 200 or 300,000 people per year. We'll see a lot of pressure off of house price appreciation and rent appreciation. Of course, a lot of this, of course, depends on what happens after our next federal election. I mean, this is what the Liberals are doing. We're probably going to have an election over the next year. I suspect some of these policies are in response to, the public's outcry over the effect that this booming population has had, not just on housing and house prices, but obviously a lot of other important social services as well. So the governments, the Liberals, are doing this to obviously shift the tone. Now, the Conservatives have said they might do something similar, but we don't know what things will be like after 2025. But for the next year, it looks like we're going to be entering a period where population is cooling. The growth is cooling, which will likely take pressure off home price appreciation and rents. And that generally, of course, is a good thing if you actually want housing to be affordable. So I think it's important to keep those things in mind if you're buying a home, if you're renting a home, in particular for people who are thinking about investing, who are looking back at what everyone made when our government was supercharging our population growth, because that level of appreciation, which was fueled by a rapid surge in population, may not be there tomorrow. And this does not mean that, investing real estate is terrible, everyone should sell the property. No, I mean, I think it just means real estate may just end up being a slightly more boring investment rather than a get-rich-quick scheme, which is probably a healthier approach to Canada's housing market. I mean, one of the biggest problems was Canadian government made housing effectively like a lottery ticket that was guaranteed to pay off, because they not only drove up demand and did everything possible to inflate home prices and rents, but also did everything possible to prevent them from falling. So that will hopefully and likely go away a little bit over the next at least over the next years, if the government follows through, and it looks like they are. I mean, surprisingly, the Liberal government looks like is following through on their targets for non-permanent residents. And we can only assume they'll do the same thing for permanent residents. So important to keep these dynamics in mind, especially as we move to the new year. I think a lot of sellers, owners are thinking that if I just wait till next year, my home will be worth $100,000 more. And again, I mean, we're these expectations of rapid appreciation are being anchored by this recency bias, where we had massive population boom, low interest rates, and that is not a normal condition. So things may just end up being a little bit more balanced and normal, and boring, quite frankly, in the year ahead. And I think boring is a good thing when we're thinking about housing and housing affordability. I hope you found that helpful. If you have any questions, shoot me an email at askjohn@movesmartly.com, or just post a comment in the show notes below.